No spoilies! No spoilies!
Another Crab's Treasure is a game that I wouldn't ever have expected to happen. It sounds so daft on paper. Dark Souls but you play as a crab is a bit of an odd sell, but not by any means the strangest idea ever to grace the video game space. It's an interesting premise, so I grabbed the game, or should I say I crabbed the game and gave it a go, and bugger me, I might have a new favourite Souls-like. I never would have expected that either, but I ain't mad about it. I thought I was burnt out on Souls-likes after spending the latter part of 2023 playing several of them in rapid succession for videos, but it turns out I wasn't burned out on the Souls-likes, I just needed to play a really good one. No hate to Liza Pi or The Surge 2, they're both fine, but Crab Souls gameplay, presentation and plot are just all better. I'm sorry, it's harsh, but I like the Crab game, so let's talk about why. Yep, we have enough of a story this time for the review to be divided into sections again. Yay, about time. Oh damn, now I have to put effort in again. Firstly though, the gameplay. Crab Souls, and yes I will be calling it that for the majority of the video, deal with it, or should I say eel with it, is a Souls-like, and whilst I'm sure you don't need the clarification at this point, let's just be safe. These are typically third-person action-focused RPGs with combat designed best for one-on-one fights, usually with stamina management, and where if you die, all the enemies respawn, well, most of the enemies respawn, and you drop the level up currency that you're carrying at the point of death. Off the bat, Crab Souls makes a change that I am really pleased with. It forewent the stamina mechanic typical of the subgenre. You can run indefinitely, you can attack and dodge as often as you please, and you don't have to be constantly pouring level ups into an extra stat. Another significant change is that there's no weapon selection. You get one rusty fork to use as a sword, and that's your lot. It can be upgraded to do more damage though, and later on you can unlock a skill that lets you turn the fork into a temporary hammer, which ties into the shell mechanic. Instead of traditional armor, Crab Souls lets you swap between different shells that you find in the levels, each with their own weight, defense and magic powers. Wearing a shell makes you take less damage from attacks overall, but if you hide inside it, you'll block all incoming damage from yourself onto the shell, but your shell will take damage when this happens and it will eventually break. This is true for both the shells that you're currently wearing and the ones that you've impaled on your fork to turn it into the hammer I mentioned. So you can't ever get too comfortable. If you really like a shell, then you can get shell insurance in the main town so that if it breaks or say you die, you'll spawn with the selected shell on you rather than having to pick it up from the point where you died or find a new one. Still though, like with a lot of Souls-likes, dodging is usually the better idea for combat because it preserves your shell's hit points and there is no way to repair a broken shell once it breaks. The shells aren't at all uncommon, but it's better to not be without one since many shells have different magical spells associated with them and different levels of health and different weights. It's a good idea to hang on to the one you like for as long as you can. My favourites were the tin can and the soda can. The former electrifies you and your attack so that enemies who hit you take some damage, and the latter shoots magical bubbles that deal no damage but work towards staggering the enemy. Well, I should say capsizing since that's what the game calls it. As you hit enemies, you'll see that under their health bar a second yellow bar is appearing and filling. Once it's full, you can deliver a heavy attack to the enemy and knock it over, leaving them open for you to get some free hits against them, and later on you can unlock a skill where your crab performs a critical hit in this situation by jumping on top of them and stabbing them with the fork. Unlike many Souls-likes, you don't have most of the basic combat skills available to you from the get-go. You'll need to unlock these powers as you go, and I don't hate this because the story itself justifies why Krill, that's what our crab is called, his name is Krill, isn't the great ass kicker of the 7 seas, and it also just feels kind of rewarding to me. I love unlocking stuff, I like working towards something for my little player character, and I'm fine with certain skills needing to be unlocked. I think it works just fine here. The game's version of Souls is microplastics, and like usual, these serve as both money and level up stuff. You collect microplastics by defeating your enemies, and you can find items in the world that exist to be traded in at the main town for currency, and if you die, you drop both your currency and your shell at the point of death. I still hate this design choice, but the game does something wonderful here that makes me respect it. In the menu, there are a few assist options that you can mess with. You've got the standard stuff like reduce the enemy damage to you, or increase the player damage done to enemies, increase the roll invincibility, but my second favourite is the remove microplastic loss on death. I love this option. Dying is already enough of a setback, as now I need to clear the same level again and often deal with the same annoying ass enemies a second time, but without my vital level up currency on the line here, I don't feel as stressed. Hell, sometimes when I die and revive at a bonfire, sorry, the moon snail shell, I realise that I now have enough microplastics to level up again. Yay! You know what that does? It adds to the fun I have. Even in death, I can get a little stronger and feel more encouraged to keep going. And because this is just an option that you can choose to play with or without, it doesn't detract from the masochists who might actually like the whole currency death mechanic. I say that, I'm sure there are at least some people who are pissed off that a Souls-like has some accessibility options to make the game easier because certain gamers TM are exhausting joyless cunts, but then again, by default, the game is a challenging Souls-like. It punishes you for your every mistake and demands a level of skill and patience, and you don't have to use any of the assist modes if you don't want to, so it shouldn't matter. I love games that allow you to adjust the separate elements of challenge to better suit your skill set, because our experiences gaming are generally quite personal, and how one person defines difficulty can vary from how another another person defines it. Sure, I could turn on the invincibility and just glide to the exit of most areas, but that's not how I personally have fun, so I tended to only adjust the settings when I was having trouble with a particularly dickish boss, and even then I only tended to decrease their damage because I'm a bit clumsy when I play video games, and this way I can survive my own errors a bit better. I just can't and never will be mad at accessibility options. I think they're great, and especially when there is one in a game that lets me give my little crab a gun. Wait, what? Yeah, so one of the options gives Krill a shell that's just a fucking handgun that one shot kills everything. It's hilarious and I love it. Why could I do this? This is so stupid in the best possible way and I fucking adore it. I didn't use the gun regularly, but just knowing that if any one boss gave me too much trouble and I could just pull out my piece and drop them made me smile, and it made me want to keep trying the bosses without the adjustment because I knew I could if I needed to. Assist options are great. I love Souls-likes and I'd love for more people to be able to play them, and these systems potentially allow for a wider audience. The combat itself overall is quite good in terms of design and feedback. The attacks feel satisfying, the animations are fun to watch without being too drawn out, and it's usually clear what move an enemy is about to do so you can best counter them, and I really enjoy unlocking more skills over the course of the game. To get new skills, you need to crack these magical umami crystals to get their power, either that or defeat either the enemies with glowing pink eyes or bosses because they'll both reward you with some of these crystal thingies. Then all you have to do is visit the Moonsnail and you can buy whatever skills you want. Sometimes beating a boss will also grant you a new unique ability. Early on you defeat this Duchess character and gain a massive claw attack that hits multiple enemies in a wide arc and also increases the amount of damage targets take for a few seconds. The second one is learned from a mantis shrimp. Basically you can do a really powerful punch that quickly destroys and capsizes your enemies. This one is also useful to break these random magical purple Rubik's Cube knockoffs that exist for some reason. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, these just feel like random video game obstacles. The third power was the ability to shoot like a pistol shrimp, although this power sucks quite a lot. I did upgrade it all the way, but it still felt pitiful even at its maximum upgradedness, so it can just stay unequipped in my inventory forever. Then there's an electric eel power that hangs around a target, electrocuting them over and over again, and can also be used to power up certain things that you find in the environment. And the last one I got in my most recent play session was the ability to create an entire shell out of your magical energy if you're naked. I haven't gotten to use it yet, but it sounds handy. You can only have 2 of these boss skills equipped at any one time, so I typically tended to keep the claw and punch because they were the better choices for general combat, though both can be swapped in the menu whenever you like. Each skill does consume some of your Crab Soul's brand mana, but you can regenerate this by dealing damage in melee, which encourages the player to be direct as often as possible. Well, I mean, you can also stand in these weird purple currents and get the power back, but they're few and far between. Every shell's unique skill also requires some of this energy to be cast, but you can unlock a perk that allows you to crack off one of these spells for free each time you swap to a new shell before it starts using your main crab mana, which I think is lovely. Like the ocean, the combat skills are so much deeper than they first appear. Sure, there's no weapon customization, but with all the skills you can unlock, you can build your own playstyle. I quite liked unlocking the scrap hammer skill, which lets you impale shells on the end of your fork to use as a club, and it deals so much more damage to enemies and capsizes them much faster. It's really helpful, and it was also just kind of a fun thing to be able to do. I really like being able to use the things I find in the environment this way. Aside from the combat, something else the game does really well is the traversal. Since there's no stamina, you can run for as long as you like, and when you're underwater you can extend your jumps by swimming. Not by a lot, of course, hermit crabs aren't great swimmers, but it is nice to have because I love it when games add simple extra steps to basic puzzles. Actually, to be fair, your swimming does have a form of stamina of its own which refills when you land and doesn't last very long when you're in the air, but then again, we're a hermit crab and they're famously bad at swimming, so I can't really fault it as a design choice. I do wish I could increase this limit, but I suppose it's not entirely necessary. Even if you do fall, you won't die right away, because fall damage isn't really a thing unless you fall into an abyss, and even then you'll only take a little bit of damage and then respawn right back where you jumped from, so I guess it's not a big deal. If you can't make the jump even by swimming, then you're either not supposed to go that way or there's a different route you're supposed to take. Do you want to know what's really weird though, is that enemies don't seem to be in the same boat as us. As much as I like how easy it can be to defeat some by making them walk off a cliff or by using this hook in this area to pull one under the stairs so it falls off, I don't see why enemies are so vulnerable to fall damage. It makes little sense to me, and I know that I shouldn't be bothered by it because it's working in my favour, but I am, screw you. Sorry, back to traversal. Early into the game you'll find this grappling hook with a very generous range to it, and this is brilliant. I love grappling around levels in video games, so this is very much welcome. With an upgrade it can also be used with these hooks to catch your enemies and lure them in for punishment. It often brings them quite close to being capsized if it doesn't capsize them immediately, and I love that for some enemies you need to grapple with them for a few seconds to complete this. Exploring the levels is just fun to do. Crab Souls is quite good at encouraging the player to dig around the maps. You'll often find new shells and tons of junk to sell, though something a bit odd is that when you find these bread claw thingies, the game seems to forget that it already told me the information about how I can sell them for a profit, and it constantly re-messages me this, and it's very weird. It's a minor bug at most, but kinda worth mentioning. At least I think it's a bug. A few of the bread claws don't have this, but some do, so who knows. Something else you can find whilst exploring the levels are these little stowaway buddies that can provide you with small buffs to your your abilities or give useful perks. They're basically like the rings from the Dark Souls games, only their system is a little bit more complex. You can have up to 3 stowaways equipped at a time, but each stowaway takes up a certain amount of capacity, and you'll need to increase your capacity in town if you want to make use of the more powerful versions of the stowaways that you'll be finding. Like with level ups, increasing your stowaway capacity costs microplastics, so you have to kind of decide what you want to do. A minute ago I mentioned a bug, and sadly it wasn't the only one I encountered. I've been punched below the floor of a boss arena on more than one occasion and dropped into the abyss below, and sometimes enemy positioning and orientation fucks up so they'll be standing kinda sideways. The biggest worry I had was when I tried to stop the recording whilst Krill was hiding in one of these moon snail shells, and the game froze for ages and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't close the recording screen thingy-majiggy, I couldn't press any buttons because just nothing would happen. It was kinda like what happened to my session of Fallout 4 the other day, come to think of it, although unlike Bethesda's garbage, Crab Souls actually sorted its shit out after a minute. There were a couple of other issues when I travelled to the sands between, and don't worry, we will discuss the puns soon, I promise you that, and upon arrival the frame rate dropped and the camera proceeded to have a seizure. What the hell, Crab Souls? Travelling away from the area seemed to solve the camera trouble, though the frame rate was still sorta choppy for the rest of that play session. I had to close the game and reopen it to get it to behave properly. Very irritating that was. Another issue was this sort of laggy slowdown thing the game does when you move from one area to another. It's very distracting, and I think I'd rather just have smaller areas or more loading screens because it's at least less jarring. The rest of my complaints though are all fairly minor and not really worth whining about. The game is very solid, it's got great enemies and systems, and I really like the level design, even if it does fall into a few of the less positive Souls-like conventions. So far I found 2 huge poison swamp areas because this is a Souls-like and you have to have a poison swamp, though sometimes, often in fact, the game channels the power of the Souls-like for good. The environments are well built and they tell a story. If you see a distant thing, then you'll almost certainly visit it at some point along your journey, and there are plenty of NPCs talking at you in overly dramatic ways reminiscent of the Souls games, although things are a bit less bleak. Well, I mean, arguably. Also, the game absolutely loves its boss fights, and it's usually very clear when you're about to enter a boss room. Most bosses in this game are really good. They walk that fine line of being challenging without being frustrating, at least I found that to be the case, and each has its own unique moveset that you need to learn to better avoid, and its own distinct appearance. Most are just big crabs, but they have their own visual personality and quirks, and a few have these extra gimmicks that keep the fights interesting. It's really hard to nail down a favourite. Almost all of them are really good in their own ways, but there is a special place in my heart for the electric eel who attacks us with a vibrator. I will not elaborate on that. The worst boss though is easily the pair of pistol shrimps, because it wouldn't be a Souls-like without the prerequisite duo boss that somehow misses the point of duo boss fights. The reason Ornstein and Smo worked so well in Dark Souls 1 is because they both played off each other really well. The match was designed to reward careful planning, patience and commitment. You couldn't rush it, and you had to carefully decide which boss you wanted to take out first, because the second part of the fight could be made much harder if you chose wrong. Why is it that so many Souls-likes who have tried their hand at a duo or group boss have failed to grasp this very simple point? The idea that the bosses have to play off each other or make up for the shortcomings of one another is such a simple idea. You can't just copy paste one of them and shift the colours. The pistol shrimps aren't even that unique, they're just basic bitch enemies with a bit more health. It's not fun, it's just lazy and it can fuck right off. I feel no shame in admitting that I cheesed this fight with the assist options, because if the devs ain't gonna put the effort in to make a duo boss fun to fight, then I ain't gonna put the effort in to fight them properly. Thankfully, there is little about this game that annoys me. It's otherwise quite well designed. We still have the usual primary healing tool that refills at checkpoints thing. In this case it's these little heart kelp pods which are adorable, but in Crab Souls some enemies will drop them sometimes and you can harvest them from around the areas if you're running low. And some shells have skills that let you recover HP, so you'll probably not be in the red for too long. The hitboxes are a little bit fucky, which is fairly standard of the subgenre, but this is usually more in your favour than the enemies, and every boss has one of these moon jellyfish just outside the arena that you can choose to spawn to if you die in a fight. Basically it's the steak of America from Elden Ring, or should I say steak of mackerel. Oh god, that was terrible. The game loves fish puns, by the by. They are the most groan-inducing things ever, and they bring me real physical pain. I love them. But my favourite joke was here on this discarded ice lolly stick. When does the combat music start playing? When you see an enemy. Jesus, shark pegging, squid diddling, cod sucking, Christ. That one was so bad that I had to put the controller down and leave the room for a second whilst I repeated the phrase, "oh fuck off," in increasingly exasperated tones. It's safe to say that I knew at that moment 2 things about this game. It was going to torture me and I was going to love it. I love bad puns. The game is, generally speaking, a really good time. The elements all come together to create a hell of a fun experience. I've been playing for about 13 hours at time of recording this, and I think I'm most of the way through the game, but I'm having an absolute blast. The gameplay is, generally speaking, fantastic. It does have a couple of issues and there are some instability problems, so you might need to close the game and reopen it from time to time to get it to be a good crab, but most of the time it works just right and it's plenty of fun. Exploring the bottom of the sea and doing battle with polluted crab monsters is exhilarating, and I love the little touches, like when you die the message reads a watery grave rather than you died, and when you defeat a boss the game says pollution sourced, which are all fairly small additions, I admit, but I really like the game with them. I think it's so much better with these little touches. Another Crab's Treasure is a lot of fun to play, and from a gameplay perspective, I'd be quite happy to call it my new favourite Souls-like. It's really good. Something else I need to bring up are the character designs. I adore them, they're all fantastic, and the intentional art style the game adopts really helps. I love the little pieces of rubbish that the crabbies use to make clothes and accessories. I adore how the lobsters are basically just centaurs. Wait, is that how a crab would see a lobster? It's gotta be, right? That actually makes a weird amount of sense. And as much as I dislike the character of Roland, I really love that he's a giant isopod with a dapper little suit. Look at this little fella. If he wasn't so contemptible, I'd want to give him a hug. I've said before, and I will again, that art style is way more important than just graphical quality, because art style is what distinguishes your game from a crowd, and Crab Souls nailed it so hard. I am loving everything here. The presentation, the exploration, the combat, and you know what else I'm really enjoying? The story. Seamless transition. Crab Souls follows Krill, an adorable little hermit crab who's just sort of minding his own business in the tide pool one day when a loan shark arrives and tells him he has to pay his taxes, and until he does he's not getting his shell back. Not really sure why a loan shark is doing tax stuff. Wouldn't that be like a debt collection agency or something? Am I overthinking this? This prompts Krill to leave the tide pool and enter the open ocean in the hopes of finding a way to get his home back, and maybe whilst he's at it he can get his taxes forgiven, because according to the locals in the shallows they're all paying most of their stuff to taxes every month and they have dick all to show for it. Now there might be possibly some slightly political themes in this cute little game about crabs, between the microplastics being the main currency due to the state of the ocean and the folks talking about how they're either being taxed out the arse or worked to death by an uncaring capitalist. I get the sense that the game might be trying to say something. Krill is just a socially anxious little guy who wants to leave others alone and be left alone in kind. He doesn't agree with the system that took his home, but he's virtually powerless against it, and he'll spend the whole game attempting to enrich others just so he can get back the one thing that's special to him. In the first area, we find the Duchess who taxes her people to hire guards and maintain her lavish lifestyle under the guise of keeping everyone safe, but it's clearly not the case because there are zombie crabs just outside her gates, and as soon as Krill says that he doesn't want to pay taxes because he didn't agree to this system and it doesn't seem to be benefiting anyone, people call him a freeloader and talk shit to him, desperately defending a system even as it slowly destroys their lives. Basically capitalism. When we get to the big city it seems nice enough, but we learn pretty quickly that most of the citizens are under the thumb of Roland, the CEO of Shell Corp, which happens to be the most powerful and influential company in the area, and that they're actively threatened into submission by Ingerton, his enforcer. A quick aside, I love that the violent squid goon is called Ingerton as a reference to the Pinkertons who broke up the strikers in, I want to say, like 1910? I don't know history very well. Plus the ink, because he's a squid. I also like that he's kind of a massive coward because he attacks us at one point then flees when you do a certain amount of damage to him because he wasn't expecting that. It was a little detail that I liked, and he only seems to be pushed to do violence to a group of people when Roland is there to tell him to do so. There are a lot of little details in this game that I like. I also just think that Ingerton has a really cool design. I genuinely really like him. The ocean that we're exploring is covered in pollution, and this gunk is making the locals sick and crazy to the point where they're seemingly regressing into feral states of being because they've got no hope left, and all the while our little crab just wants to get his home back. It's a relatable goal of getting back what's ours, packaged in a narrative that comments on the state of the environment and the ethical practices of the systems that arose from this disregard, and that are sustained, paradoxically, only through the unsustainable mess around them. It's quite good. Krill starts the game doing work for the Duchess to have his debt forgiven, but when he returns with a prize in claw, he finds that her castle has fallen and she's spewing gunk as she admits that she and her order are worthless. We go to the big city because our shell is taken there by the loan shark after the kingdom collapsed so he could sell it to the highest bidder, and we find it's in the midst of a pawn shop owner who doesn't want to part with it because he realises how valuable it is to us specifically. He can basically get us to do whatever he wants. We also happen to have arrived in town on Garbage Day, the day when Garbage Island, which is a real thing floating in the ocean, look it up, it's depressing, floats overhead and drops from the sky a cereal box with a map on the back leading to treasure, so the pawn shop owner makes us a deal. If we get him this treasure, which could be anything, any sort of value, he'll give us our home back. Of course, a few other folks in town would love to get their claws on the treasure. The local museum curator wants to put it on display for the town, a few crabs want the goods for themselves, the local bartender wants the money to save her failing business and provide for her kids, and then there's Roland, who just wants the treasure because he's a greedy arsehole who's addicted to money. This prompts us to search to see for the missing parts of the map. It's a bit torn, the cereal box that the map is drawn on, and as we do, we see how sick and polluted the environment is, and just how dangerous the open ocean can be to someone as small as Krill, so he has to toughen up and become more confident as he goes. But in the end, he still has that one goal. He just wants to get his home back and return to his normality. This requires us to traverse the sands between. God fucking damn it. No, but for real, I do love the pun and the Elden Ring reference. It's just, you know, when a pun is mildly infuriating, it's like the best kind of pun. It both makes me smile and sigh in agony. I really like how the sands between is used in this game. Initially, we're following these safe paths, which are like scent trails that keep the main boss at bay, but then during our second crossing, we learn that the path we have to take hasn't been upheld, so we will have to outrun the boss because it's a bit too tough for us to take on right now. But eventually, we will have to kill the boss himself because he's eaten the final part of the map, the greedy cunt. Once we do have the entire map, Roland rocks up and takes all of our hard work so we can go and find the treasure for himself, and funnily enough, a few crabs in town defend his greed because he's rich so he must be right. It's sort of like how the Musk fan babies defend that meme of a human, which was infuriating, but I can't fault the game for its accuracy. Eventually we find Roland on a big rig he's made to excavate the treasure, and then we board it. He admits that he was waiting for us to do something like this so he'd have an excuse to kill us. I do like that the other crabs join us here and also throughout our journey, even though Krill is the only one ever doing anything. It's still nice to see them, especially this character right here, who is initially called the Try-Hard Guard, who is basically laughing at all times. She's fun. She has a genuine respect for us and admits that she's out seeking the glory of battle. She didn't come for the treasure, she came for the fight and for the adventure. So this little moment in the cutscene before we fight Roland when she leaps in to fight Inkerton made me smile. We then fall into a deep abyss and discover what the treasure was all along, though I won't spoil this one because it's a good turn of events and the brain worms tell me I'll be recommending this game. All I will say is that it's not what we thought it was. It is a good story though, one that has way more depth than a silly tale about a crab has any right to have, and often its tone shifts nicely as it goes. The writers knew when it was okay to be silly, necessary to be serious, and when it was time to be bleak and when we needed to be hopeful. Given that I've played some real stinkers in my time, I'm always pleased to see when a creator understands the importance of tonal shifts to avoid audience apathy. The world of Crab Souls feels rich and lived in, a lot of the characters have more going on than you'd expect, and I enjoyed getting to spend time with them. The voice acting is fine for the most part though, the actual quality of the recorded lines, as in on a technical level, isn't great a lot of the time, which isn't the worst thing, but it was kinda noticeable. Fortunately, there are very few fully voiced cutscenes, so it wasn't the biggest issue in the world. Ultimately, I'm enjoying the story. I've not finished it yet, but I'm excited to see where it goes. We're in an abyss right now with a dark voice reaching out to me as spider crabs shoot exploding lasers at us, and somehow that's not the weirdest sentence I've ever written. I've enjoyed spending time in this game's world, and with Krill. He's a good character, a bit self-serving, sure, but I don't fully blame him for his outlook. That shell of his was his whole world, and losing it matters to him, understandably so. He just wants things to be simple again, regardless of how normality is paradoxically brief on the grand scale. After all, normality only ever exists briefly. What was normal to me, say, 5 years ago was like an entirely different life. I lived at my mum's house, I walked the dog every day, I worked at a supermarket and spent the days contemplating something bad. That was my normal for a long time, but my routines today are so utterly different. Continuity is strange like that. It exists briefly in the grand scheme of things, and one day this version of normal will shift for better or worse. Krill's normal shifted. He's doing things he never expected, yet yearns for a return to the mundane, even knowing what he knows now because it was easier then. The story of this game is really strong, and it shows why characterizing the protagonist of a Souls-like can be a really good thing. I appreciate Krill's struggle, I find him adorable, and it's been fun seeing him grow yet still maintain his core values and desires, even if they only really make sense to him and no one else. I do get the sense that something might shift sooner or later, but I'll have to keep playing to see. The point of this section is that the writers did a good job. I love the turn of events, I love the dialogue, and I love the world of Crab Souls. The story is really good. Crab Souls, or to use the proper title, Another Crab's Treasure, is a really bloody good game and I highly recommend checking it out. I thought I was over the whole Souls-like thing, but now I'm back in the headspace again and I have a silly game about a crab to thank for that. The gameplay is solid, the story is well written and clever with interesting themes and characters, the world is a great place to explore, the art style is fantastic, the music too. I completely forgot to mention the music, but I love the background tracks for the areas, they all fit them so well. My favourite track was the one from the Shallow shallows. It just feels so right for that area, and for some reason it was weirdly nostalgic to me. I don't know entirely why. Of course, I'd never played the game before, but when I heard it, it felt like I was coming home, and I can't fully explain why. I just think it's a really good track. It could just be that I love the ocean and have always enjoyed seeing games that take us below the waves. Maybe it reminded me of the old platformers I used to play, or maybe it's something else entirely, but who cares? I loved it. Another Crab's Treasure is just a wonderful game all around. It only has a few technical troubles that I do hope get fixed pretty soon, and even then, even if they don't, it's not going to stop me from playing the game. It's a really good game. Its cute presentation hides an immense amount of depth, it's a lot of fun to play on the moment-to-moment level, and those assist modes make it more accessible to a wider audience. I sincerely mean that this game might just be my new favourite Souls-like. It does so much well, it really understands the medium, and whilst one of the bosses was a complete dud, those pistol shrimps aren't getting any better, I still consider it to otherwise be an exemplar of the subgenre. Though to be fair, any game that lets me play as an adorable crab with access to a firearm is more than worthy of attention. Well, that'll do. I hope you enjoyed this review, my lovelies. Don't forget to do the whole like the video and comment and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. You take it easy out there and stay safe. I love you all, and we will see you next time. See. Get it? It's an ocean pun.